How long do you remain conscious for after getting your head chopped off? For centuries, people have thought that a severed head might be aware of what's going on for up to 30 seconds after decapitation, or even longer. That folklore has its origins in the story we're bringing to you today on Assassins. So stick around until the end to find out. It's July 1793, a summer's day in Paris. A 50-year-old man, Jean-Paul Marat, lowers himself into a cooling medicinal bath. In his day-to-day life, Marat has a reputation for being a bit of a grump. He's often angry, quick to find fault, unwilling to forgive grudges. But this bath, this is his happy place. One of the only places he feels relief. You see, his body is covered in oozing, itching, burning blisters. But in these calming waters, the pain subsides. And so, he's taken to organising his entire life around bath time. For Marat, the bath isn't just a place to relax, it's a place to work. He works while he soaks his body, planning, writing, theorising. He's even arranged for a board to be laid across the tub as a makeshift writing desk. But he doesn't stop there. Marat conducts business meetings from the tub. Visitors come and go, some probably questioning whether this really had to be an in-person meeting. Today, a young woman has requested some time by the tub. He's already turned her away once, but she's persistent and claims to have some juicy information for him. You see, Marat's work has involved compiling lists of traitors, people disloyal to the cause. And this woman claims to have papers that identify a whole nest of traitors. He's intrigued and invites her in. But it's all a lie. The young woman isn't there to give up traitors. She's not sharing secrets with this man. She hates this man. And it's not just a list that she's brought to their meeting. It's a knife. Hello my friend, I'm Aslan Pahari and this is Assassins, the show where we tell the stories of history's most shocking assassinations. And today, a killing taken from one of the bloodiest events in human history, an event whose impact still resonates today, the French Revolution. Now, when someone mentions the French Revolution, what springs to mind? You might know that it involved working and middle-class people rising up against the ruling class. Maybe you've heard how the Queen, Marie Antoinette, allegedly said, "Let them eat cake," to a bunch of starving people. Or maybe you have an image of people losing their heads to a razor-sharp guillotine. But what you might not know is that some of the bloodiest conflicts of the French Revolution came from infighting within the revolutionary groups themselves. So, who were these traitors that Marat was compiling lists of? And what inspired a young woman, half his age, to travel almost 300 kilometers to kill him? By the time Marat lowers himself into the tub on that fateful day, the French Revolution was 4 years old. It all started back in May 1789. Although the precursors to the revolution, much like the sores all over Marat's body, had been festering for much longer. There's a meeting of what's called the États Généraux at the Palace of Versailles. Man, French is such a beautiful language, but I think I better stick to the Western Sydney pronunciation for today, Estates General. So, the Estates General brings together representatives of the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. They don't meet very often, only on the orders of the king, and only when there's a crisis. But boy, is there a crisis. The country is broke. France has run out of cash, and a big chunk of it has been consumed by the French royal court, who have been spending way beyond their means. Parties, feasts, fancy clothes, huge wigs, statement jewellery, small yappy dogs, groomed by the best canine hairdressers money can buy. But it's not just frivolous spending by the elites, there's also war. Military campaigns are getting costly as European states jostle with each other for power. And the cherry on top is that, well, there aren't any cherries. Or other food for that matter. Harvests have been poor and there's not enough bread to feed the people. At the heart of France's financial woes is tax. The richest people in France, the aristocrats in their powdered wigs, the church officials in the safety of their richly decorated cathedrals, they don't pay any. It's up to the commoners to pay France's way. All those people just trying to get by are hit with tax bills to keep the country running, and the royal court in toy poodles. Imagine that! Big multinational companies and wealthy individuals finding ways to not pay their fair share of tax. And all the while, workers shoulder the burden. Gee, aren't we lucky that is a thing of the past? So the third estate, the commoners, the regular Joes, are hungry. And when the estates general meets, they look at these spoiled fat cats and they don't like what they see. And every time the commoners say, hey, you guys have got to start paying your fair share, those fat cats ignore them, staring off into the middle distance, hoping that it might all just go away. But it doesn't. By June 1789, a few weeks after the meeting of the Estates General, the commoners declared they're now the National Assembly, a legislative body who demand the creation of a French constitution. The court, the nobility, and the church continue to waste time, suggesting half measures in response, but it's all too little and too late. On July 14, ordinary citizens stormed the Bastille, a royal prison and fort. The French Revolution begins. The revolution is barely a month old when the National Assembly adopts the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It's a radical text that states all people are born free and all have the right to liberty, security, and resistance to oppression. It upends ancient ideas about sovereignty, declaring that power belongs to the people, not the elites, who had always assumed power by birthright. Crowds, made up mostly of women, marched from Paris to Versailles. They demand bread and try to force the king, Louis XVI, to sign the declaration. They also forced Louis's court to move from Versailles to Paris, to the beating heart of revolutionary fervour. In Paris, the royal court is set up in the Tuileries, a dilapidated palace not used since the time of King Louis XIV. As unsavoury as these new digs might have been to the royals, they needn't have worried. They wouldn't be there for very long anyway. Within a few years, revolutionary forces stormed the rundown palace, marking the end of the French monarchy and the creation of the National Convention, a legislative body to rule the country. Before long, both Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette, lose their heads to the guillotine. It seems as if the revolutionaries have won. The ruling class, the elites, have been overthrown, and a more democratic body will govern the country. But, as we hear time and time again, power corrupts. 4 years in, and the revolutionary forces are tearing themselves apart. Now, it's not like the revolutionaries have ever been one big happy family. Factions have existed from the early days. But as the revolution drags on, these factions splinter. Again and again along lines of radicalization. One faction, the Jacobins, are harsh, wanting centralized power and control. Let's call them the extremists. Another, the Girondins, take a more moderate approach, wanting power to be shared in a decentralized way. We'll call them the mods. Now, some of the mods are so moderate that they even object to the execution of the king. It's not that they don't want change, they just think it can be achieved without all this bloodshed. The extremists see these calls for moderation as a sign that the mods are enemies of the revolution. And before long, these factional differences lead to mass killings. Which brings us back to July 1793, that summer's day in Paris, as Jean-Paul Marat gently lowers himself into a bathtub. Marat was born to a Swiss-Italian father and a French mother. As a young man, he moved to Paris to study medicine, but never gained any actual medical qualifications. He then moved to London to practice medicine informally for a while, which is something you could do back then. These days, he'd call himself an influencer. Marat makes friends with artists and thinkers and develops his political thinking. He writes a pamphlet called The Chains of Slavery, subtitled A Work in which the clandestine and villainous attempts of princes to ruin liberty are pointed out and the dreadful scenes of despotism disclosed. A bit much, really. Brother, you need to think about SEO. In his early 30s, Marat moves back to Paris. He's still practicing medicine and manages to score a pretty high-powered job as the physician to the Comte d'Artois, Louis XVI's youngest brother. That's right, Marat, this future revolutionary, joins the French royal court for 6 years. It's a comfortable, intellectually stimulating life that allows him to keep publishing scientific and political work. But then, in 1789, there's that meeting of the Estates General. Suddenly, his life's purpose becomes clear. He will dedicate himself to the ideals of equality and freedom for all. Deeply disappointed by the nobility's refusal to give up their economic and social power, Marat quickly becomes a hard man of the revolution. He rises to prominence as the editor of the newspaper L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people. His style is radical, populist, and aggressive. For example, in 1790, he whips up revolutionary fervor by writing, "A year ago, by cutting off 500 or 600 heads, you would have set yourselves free and happy forever. Today, it would need 10,000. Within a few months, perhaps you would need to cut off 100,000. Marat's writing is so controversial that he's frequently forced to hide out in the Parisian sewers, which wouldn't have done much for his skin condition. No wonder he wanted to spend his whole life in a bathtub after that. Marat becomes an increasingly powerful member of the extremists, the more radical faction of the revolutionary forces. He joins the Comité de Surveillance, a group whose sole purpose is to root out and punish the more moderate revolutionaries. The mods want equality and freedom for all, but not at the expense of the French monarchy or nobility. But to Marat, the mods are dangerous and subversive. A few days before Marat's fateful afternoon in the bath, a young woman arrives in Paris, traveling from her home in car almost 300 kilometers away. Her name is Charlotte Corday. She's a thoughtful-looking woman, her eyes grey, her forehead high. At 25 years old, she's half Marat's age. Corday isn't a card-carrying member of the mods, but she's passionate about the cause. She's educated in the works of Voltaire and Rousseau, writers who were critical of old-school social structures. But she's wary of violence. Corday believes in the social contract, in the inherent goodness of people, and wants to help create a society based on reason and tolerance. She's travelled to Paris to help put a stop to the extremist violence. And her plan to do this? Well, violence. She's here to assassinate Jean-Paul Marat. In her mind, Marat and those extremists like him are responsible for the escalating horror of the revolution. And they have to be stopped. In Paris, she buys a kitchen knife, a 12-centimeter blade. She had planned to kill Marat at the National Convention to make an example out of him. And so when she hears that he rarely steps outside anymore because his skin is so painful and inflamed, she's bitterly disappointed. She needs to come up with a new assassination plot. Corday decides to request a bathside meeting. She's going to turn up at his house with a promise to name moderate traitors, members of the faction who she'll say have been planning an uprising against the extremists. And then she'll just ask to be let in. There's no way that's going to work, right? Well, at first, when she turns up in the morning, it doesn't work. She's turned away. But when she returns later that evening, Marat willingly accepts her into his home. She's led up to the bathroom, where she finds Marat, as legend has it, soaking in his bathtub. They get down to business. For about 15 minutes, she reads out the traitors' names. He writes them down, pleased with this intel. And then, with his guard down, she takes out the knife, bringing it down with all the force she can muster, plunging it deep into his chest. Resigned to her fate, Corday doesn't even attempt to escape. Marat calls for help. His wife rushes into the room, followed by the distributor of his newspaper, who seizes Corday. Two neighbors, a military surgeon and a dentist, rush in and attempt to revive Marat, but it's no use. Corday's knife pierced an artery close to Marat's heart. He's dead within seconds. As news of the assassination spreads, a crowd gathers, baying for Corday's blood. Republican officials arrive to interrogate Corday. They try to calm the crowd, who would have hanged her there and then. Instead, Corday is tried for her crime. The trial lasts 4 days. Cross-examination tries to prove that she's part of a larger mob conspiracy. But she testifies that she acted alone, saying, "I killed one man to save 100,000. Corday emphasizes that she believes in the cause of revolution, but not its methods. But it's all to no avail. Corday is to be executed for treason. The guillotine awaits. On the day of her execution, Corday asks to have her portrait painted. As she waits for the cart that will deliver her to the guillotine, she's shown the work, suggests some changes, and gives her approval. For someone about to have her head chopped off, that's pretty chill. At the guillotine, she's forced to wear a red blouse, signaling her status as a traitor. The midsummer sky bursts with rain, drenching Charlotte and the crowd around her. And then, she is put to death. Immediately after the guillotine falls, a man there to make repairs to the guillotine picks up her head from the basket and slaps it on the cheek. What the heck, she's already dead. There's no need for that. Those present at the execution describe how a look of unequivocal indignation came over the face of her severed head after the slap. It was even said that her face blushed. For years afterwards, this anecdote was repeated as proof that guillotine victims might retain consciousness for a while after the blade falls. But it turns out that this is just folklore. One academic paper on the subject states that, and I quote, "The rumors that circulated through the European consciousness during the terror of the French Revolution appear to be just that. Curious urban legends from an awed and terrified public." End quote. The best evidence we currently have suggests that consciousness is lost almost instantly after decapitation, within a second or two. Oh, and you'll be pleased to know that the man who slapped the face of her disembodied head was thrown in jail for 3 months. And fair enough. What a jerk. In the end, the assassination of Marat doesn't have the impact Corday hoped it would. Marat is seen by the extremists as a martyr of the revolution, a victim of a traitorous mob. The mods see things differently. Corday becomes known as the angel of assassination. The opposing factions of this revolutionary force, once united by a desire to upend social order, continue to harden into the reign of terror, and 17,000 people are killed by guillotine. Contrary to what you might think, even though many high-profile members of the ruling class do meet their end at the guillotine's razor-sharp edge, most people executed during the French Revolution are commoners, victims of their own uprising. The revolutionaries would continue trying to create a system of government to match their ideals, but ultimately, their differences and inability to compromise would lead France further into economic turmoil, political chaos, and uncertainty. The ideal conditions for an enterprising, ambitious military official to seize power for himself. Thank you for watching, my friend. If there's an assassination you'd like us to cover on this show, drop it in the comments.